Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And I know there are people that are still joining, so we'll take it slow as we get started here. For those of you that are have attended previous sessions or seen the recordings, um, hopefully you know my name is John Gomez. I'm the CEO and founder of Sensato. And some of the stuff we cover over the next couple slides will be repetitive to you, but please bear with us. We do have people continuing to sign up for this program, and we continue to grow. I think we're at over 150, 160 different people that are participating in this training event, which is awesome. And as we've said in the past, if any of you have ideas for content that you'd like to see presented or you would like to present. It's a pretty substantial audience. It's across healthcare, all sizes of healthcare organizations, representatives from government, and some other organizations that are in some of the other critical infrastructure sectors. So with that, just again, a reminder that we try to take things a little differently. This isn't your status quo um, cybersecurity presentation. So you may find things in here that you either don't agree with or maybe a little different. So right size this to fit your view and your organization. Hopefully, most of all, it sparks a conversation and evolves all of our abilities to defend our organizations. We have covered 2 of the 6 series in this program. This series today will be on advanced social compromise. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And then coming up in the near future, next month, low and slow attacks. Really important to kind of talk about because these are attacks specifically crafted by attackers to evade detection. Very hard attacks to figure out that are occurring regardless of the technology you're using. And then we'll get into K2K attacks, something that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Thankfully, it's good that we don't see a lot of K2K, but they're interesting attacks, interesting phenomena. Specifically, typically, we see those in the defense sector, but given what's going on with the Ukraine and Russia and how that's all evolving and developing, and have to get this in there, Elon Musk's current challenges with Russia, we may be seeing K2K attacks, and so it'd be good to know what they are. And then the last one, La Femme Nikita, is really kind of a combination of everything we've covered up until that point in time and kind of a graduation exercise, if you will. So that's what's coming down the road. With that, some of you that are newer may be wondering why we're doing this. As an organization, Sensato, we've been around since 2013. We started from the attack and offensive computing side, specifically within healthcare, and then evolved from there. And a lot of times when we're speaking to defenders, we find that their viewpoint of how attackers operate is really not realistic. And so we put this program together to really help represent the attacker's perspective and shed some light on how attackers think. Hopefully, ultimately, that means that by respecting their audacity as a defender, it improves your security, and we don't rationalize or kind of take for granted what lengths an attacker will go to. And so the other objectives here is also to give you an opportunity to do some just-in-time auditing. I try to present this in a way that if you wanted to, you could play along at home or wherever you may be these days, and really think about, well, what if this were occurring here at this point in time? How would we defend it? How would we detect it, defend it, and respond to it? So this is a good way to evolve blue team skills. You can take the material out of here and create tabletops from them. And also kind of force attacker creativity, right? Ultimately, hopefully, as we get better as defenders, then the attackers have to get more creative, and hopefully that reduces their effectiveness because we keep kind of skating to where the puck's going to be versus to where the puck was. So that's some of the background on the program. We do have to pay the bills, so if you are interested in a holistic out of the box cybersecurity as a service platform, we've developed one. We'll talk more about that later, give you a chance to learn more about that. For right now, let's just dive into what we're doing. A lot of what we're going to do today comes from our Cybersecurity Tactical Operations Center, our CTOC. They deal with a lot of these things day to day, not just in the environments that they're monitoring, but also people contacting them and asking for advice or thinking that something's going on in their environment. And so they respond to that, and we kind of try and take some of that information, plus the threat intelligence we see, and the work we actually do on offensive computing, and bring all that together to bring you these programs. So for those of you that are new, we've kind of been pretending we're part of a offensive computing group that is out of the People's Republic of Pineland, which is a fictitious country, and that the province of Atlantica has decided to invade our country. So we're fighting back with everything we got, including cyber warfare. So we're kind of taking that position. In each one of the previous sessions we did, we took on different missions. In this session, our mission is that we're going to go after a national defense contractor known as REMS. REMS is headquartered in a small town known as Newton in Atlantica, our enemy. They have a population there of about 11,200 people, and they employ about 1,750 people who live in and around that town of Newton where the headquarters is. REMS has an extremely strong security. So direct attacks, attempts to breach that perimeter, to infiltrate that perimeter specifically through VPNs, firewalls, portals, and other such technology has not really bore any fruit out for us. So we've been asked to and or instructed to utilize social compromise as a mean to hopefully introduce payloads or establish a long-term persistence presence in this defense contractor that we can then hopefully leverage in the future. So a few things here as we get into this concept of advanced social compromise and what am I actually talking about before we go any further. So what I really want to talk to you guys and share with you today is how do we as attackers put together a social, well, yeah, social compromise. But I'm not really sitting here trying to show you like different tools like KnowBe4 or FishMe or GoFish or whatever. What I'm really trying to do is step back before that with you and think about how can we effectively use social compromise to reach our objective. In this case, to deploy a payload and establish long-term persistence. And there's a bunch of things that I think we often miss when we think of phishing and other types of attacks. And I'm going to start with just what's on this screen. And there's some things in here that maybe don't stand out to you if you're not used to the offensive computing side, but I will kind of use this as an opportunity to hopefully illustrate some things that defenders sometimes make a mistake on. So this target right here, this exact mission, if you will, is actually based on a real mission. And on a real attack that took place and actually did take place against a defense contractor here in the US. What happened is, similar to what's stated here, this defense contractor was headquartered in a small town, or had one of their R&D centers was located in a small town, and it did employ a couple thousand people. The town itself was rather small. It was a quaint, cool town, a lot of coffee shops, and just a cool kind of Americana Main Street USA kind of town. So not a big population. The problem here was that there were nation-state actors who were looking to breach the security of this defense contractor, and going straight at them did not prove effective. So what they did is they started studying the town, and they started studying the work patterns of the workers at this defense contractor. And this in of itself is interesting because I think a lot of times when we think of nation state, we think of these clandestine spy kind of things. And a lot of times nation state activity takes place just by people hanging out in Starbucks and seeing who comes in, and somebody forgets to take a badge off. And now they work for that contractor or that employer. So now you also realize, hey, they use the Wi-Fi at that local coffee shop. So they actually, in this situation, they didn't actually go after the coffee shop and they didn't infiltrate that network. They actually took things a little bit to another step, and we're going to use some of their techniques as we talk through what we do today. And one of the things they did was they compromised a local photography studio. And they were very successful when they compromised that local photography studio at actually compromising the defense contractor. Now, you may be wondering why. You may be thinking, well, the photography studio, maybe they do pictures for their brochures or something else to do with the defense contractor. But the photography studio had no business relationship directly with the defense contractor. But this was a small town, and there's only so many people to date in this town or at the defense contractor. So eventually people started dating, and eventually they would get married. And when they got married, they would hire one of two, maybe three photography studios that were in town. And so they, at some point, when after the marriage or after the wedding and the festivities, people would need to go onto this website hosted by the photography studio and look at what pictures they wanted included in their album. And lo and behold, that was often done when people were sitting at their desk at work during their lunch breaks or whenever they were bored. And that was the method of compromise. They ultimately were able to get in because the people at work were looking at their wedding albums. And that's kind of what led to that compromise. Now, the reason I bring this up in the context of social compromise is because one of the things that we're seeing here is the study of behavior, right? Is the study of how do people interact within an environment? How do they interact from their work to their leisure time and back and forth? And what are the dynamics? What is the population? What type of culture do we have here? These are all things that factor into advanced social compromise. And we need to take pause and think about that word advanced. I'm not looking to talk to you guys today about how do we put together a set of emails that come from your uncle in Nigeria, right? And some of the things that we train users to be on the lookout for. We're going to talk about that. And it's actually a big mistake. Like, we've spent all our time over the past several years really focused on the obvious, and really focused on the big stuff that kind of is silly, right? That if we think about it, is just real basic social compromise, right? But they're effective, and they're a challenge for everybody, for sure. The big question you have to ask yourself is, well, what about the more advanced stuff? And what am I doing to protect my organization and educate my end users from advanced social compromise? And things that go beyond just, hey, I'm your uncle in Nigeria, and I really, I'm sorry that we haven't talked, but I owe you $7 million, just click here. Or even things a little slightly more sophisticated, like, you've got a gift card to Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks or wherever, and because you're such an outstanding employee, which is actually quite effective when we do kind of intro social compromises. But with that, I wanted to give you that foundation and help you really set the stage for the fact that what we're talking about here is a little more advanced. And even though it's more advanced, we are going to use very many of the same channels that you probably are defending against now. So we are going to talk about emails and how can we use those. We're going to talk a little bit slightly different about them. We're going to talk about phone attacks or phishing. I'm not sure if we're still using that term or not, but phone attacks. We're going to talk about the use of social media, and we'll talk about some other stuff as well. But ultimately, the thing from my perspective as the attacker, so if you guys came to me, or if we really were doing this mission and suddenly all of us together were charged with this responsibility to go after a defense contractor or a hospital or whatever it may be, we could use these channels. But the amount of work we have to put in to really have a very high success rate. And by high success rate, we want to assure that whatever we do is going to be about 90% effective. And that's critical to understand. So we're not looking to kind of spray and pray and send out 1,000 emails across somebody's domain, and see what sticks. We are going to be extremely surgical and tactical in terms of how we go after somebody. I want to go back to this story I just gave you about this defense contractor. And some of you may be thinking, oh, well, that's a defense contractor, so obviously, nation states aren't coming after us. So I want to just give you a little bit of pause and actually go back to this slide, because what I'm about to tell you is the exact reason we're doing this series, is because there are probably some of you, hopefully not a lot, that are thinking, well, that's a defense contractor and it's nation state and they don't come after hospitals. My hospital's too small. Why would they ever come after me? So I want you to know that our Security Operations Center, the CTOC, did have a situation where a hospital, where a honeypot alert went off, and detected the IP address was actually an external IP, and the external IP resolved back to a pub or a restaurant in the neighborhood that the hospital was located at. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the response of that team was, well, that doesn't make sense, and it must be a false positive, which, yes, the first part of that is correct. It doesn't make sense. Why would a pub be reaching out to a local organization like that? But the fact that we had geographic familiarity kind of discounted the threat. And so I wanted to make sure I reminded myself to tell you guys that, because it's very similar to this concept of going after a photography studio and then pivoting into my target. Um, I actually did that with a national security project I did a while ago on automated countermeasures, where we used a similar type of situation to demonstrate the ineffectiveness of automated countermeasures. So just because it's local does not mean that you should let down your guard, kind of pivoting that way. In any case, back to this. So various things. Now the challenge here is, okay, if these are the channels, what are the specific tools we need to bring to bear in order to have a very high success rate, 90+%, if we use any of these or a combination of these? And hopefully that helps you start understanding that you need to probably up your game when it comes to how do you defend against advanced social compromise. But for right now, we're all pretending we're attackers. And really the big thing that we've got to do, this has really very little to do with tech, right? So this isn't about you having some tool that is going to, detect that I'm sending you a phishing email. In fact, one of the things I'm going to focus on as we go through this is not really care about what you're using to detect phishing attempts, right? Because I get it, there's a whole bunch of really great stuff in Office 365 to detect those attempts. There's a lot of other tools that are great at that. What I need to do is not worry about those tools as an attacker. And frankly, if I was working with my brother Hector in arms, we would not be thinking about what are the tools. We'd be thinking about dark psychology. And this plays a role in much of what we think about with attacks. Even the previous stuff we've done with compromising life support systems and circumventing perimeters, VPNs, and firewalls and stuff, there is an element of dark psychology to that. And that element is what we, as the attacker, consider rational response theory. And I'm not going to go too deep into that. Basically stated, rational response theory is the defender's psychology. It's your psychology if you're a defender that you rationalize things. And that's my first hope. So whether I'm talking about social compromise or I'm talking about breaching your firewall or coming at you with a K2K attack that we kind of mentioned, or a low and slow, whatever the attack is, DDoS, ransomware, I don't care what it is. My first hope as an attacker is that your psychology will be such that you rationalize what I do or rationalize the activity you see. And we get into a whole thing in our incident response training around there is no such thing as a false positive. And it's because of this dark psychology. But today we're going to focus very much on how do we apply dark psychology to developing advanced social compromises. The way to think about this is you can use some of these techniques in developing your own advanced social compromises. The other thing about this is dark psychology works across venues. So it doesn't matter if I'm meeting you face to face on a phone, on a Teams meeting, sending you an email, calling you, whatever it may be, dark psychology works. And now I'm sure normal psychologists will argue that point, but if you look at the amount of advanced social compromise breaches, there's probably something to be said, or some type of evidence-based study that should be done. So what is dark psychology? So dark psychology, very simply stated, is the manipulation of another person, right? It's somewhat art, somewhat science, and this is where kind of probably there are legitimate psychologists, I am not a psychologist, that probably would take exception with the term. But regardless of that exception, the reality is we as attackers are relying on manipulation and maybe mind control's too strong a word, but ultimately we are trying to mold the behavior. And that's what we're really focused on when we're thinking of advanced social compromise. The difference being with non-advanced or a basic compromise like a phishing attack is that those are kind of based on numbers, right? We're hoping there's a few elements to them that may prey on some of your emotions, but ultimately it's a numbers game. If I send out enough of these emails or I make enough of these phone calls, somebody's going to bite and I'm going to get to compromise that individual and move forward with my attack. Here, we're really, again, trying to be very surgical and hopefully have a much higher success rate. So the other thing here that I want to point out is that it is one of the most powerful tools that an attacker can employ. Uh, okay, so hopefully you guys can still see my screen. I had a little bit of a hiccup there. And it is also one of the least understood by defenders, right? We don't really spend a lot of time, if you're going through a CISP program or some other cybersecurity training program, on the psychology of the attacker or the psychology of the defender, let alone the psychology of the end user. And in this case, what we're talking about here is how do we employ dark psychology against the end user so that we can ultimately compromise that end user, right? Lower their guard and get what we want from them. So here's kind of the social engineering attack cycle. And I think it's really important to think about it in these terms. Now, if you're looking to either employ advanced social compromise because you want to become an attacker and you're going to change your line of work, these are the things you need to know. And if you're just looking to put together a great security awareness program, these are the things you need to know. So the first thing is information gathering. And we've talked about this in the past, right? Open source intelligence and things of that nature. But this is a little bit more intimate. Open source intelligence, when we're doing that, is usually much more broad stroke. Maybe we're trying to fingerprint your environment from help wanted ads, or we're looking to see who your partners are. But this is really, we're going to start zeroing in on a set of people, right? A sample population. We again are not praying and spraying. We're going to say, hey, let's go after the CEO. Let's go after the chief medical officer. Let's go after the VP of whatever, right? Let's go after your nurses, right? We're going to be very specific. And so we are going to educate ourselves on who we want to go after, what's their typical role within the organization, what associations they belong to, where do they live, again back to this geography and understanding our geography, and what do they do from a cultural perspective, and how do we learn that through social media. So this is the first big step we're going to take. And once we have that information about this person, and I can get really deep on these topics, so I'll try to keep it as high level as I can, but if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat window and I'll go as far down the rabbit hole as you wish. The big thing here is we want to understand the nuances of the person. We really want to get to understand, how they function in that capacity. And there's a bunch of things we're looking for. Are they stressed out? Do they work a lot of hours? What's their typical shifts? There's a bunch of things we're going to build up in our portfolio related to our targets. And it doesn't have to be one, right? We can go after 10 or 20 people. What we don't want to do is try to do what I mentioned earlier, go after like 1,000, right? That doesn't help us. That's just spray and pray. The second thing is, once we have that information, that psychological profile, that target profile, we're going to try to develop a relationship. And we're going to do that in different ways. And I think this is also a spot where advanced social compromise parts ways with basic social compromise, right? Basic social compromise, we may send an email out, maybe two, see what happens, see if somebody clicks. Here, we're going to craft a campaign. We're going to send you a bunch of messages. We may call you. We may pretend to be somebody. If we can figure out where you are on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, we're going to connect with you there. We're going to figure out what associations you belong to, as I mentioned, and we're going to see if we can join that association and then get to know you. So this is really about figuring out how do we get to develop that relationship, and what is the number one thing I am trying to do in that relationship, right? The number one thing. And obviously we're not in a room together. If we were, somebody could shout out the answer. The number one thing we are trying to do is establish trust, right? That's all I'm really working on, is get you to the point where you start to think that I'm an acquaintance, friend, coworker, colleague, whatever it may be, and you don't have any reason to fear interacting with me. Once I do that, once I get to that point, then I'm going to be here, right? I'm going to exploit that relationship. And I'm going to exploit it by getting you to do something that you normally may not do under those circumstances. And then eventually I'm going to get you to execute or achieve my objective, right? You're going to do my bidding. And that's really the kind of, bare truth of it. It's not, I can make it a lot prettier and use fancier terms, but those are typically the stages. And, that can happen very quickly, right? It could happen in a single message or instance, phone call, or it could happen over a period of time. I always try to remind people that most sophisticated attackers aren't on a typical timeline. Usually they have all the time they need, so this can take days, weeks, or months, and to build this up. It just depends on how important the objective and the mission are. So in our situation, if we're going after a defense contractor, obviously we're going to do a lot of information gathering, intelligence gathering, much like you heard me tell you the story about the photography studio that got compromised. We're then going to develop relationships. In that case, the relationship was between the photography studio and the employees of the defense contractor. They had a relationship, and there was trust there that when they were looking at those pictures of their wedding and their videos, there was no reason to be scared. And so they could, any warnings from antivirus or pop-up blockers or any of that were just annoying, right? This is my photography studio. I know Ken. Ken's a great guy. They came and did, they were awesome at my wedding, and they filmed everything. There's trust, and so we as the nation state will exploit that trust. So you could have a third party involved to help drive and foster that relationship. The important part is we have a relationship. It's based on information known about you, the target, and we can exploit trust. So with that, let's talk a little bit deeper about kind of what we're trying to trigger. So regardless of the advanced social compromise, we must impact three things: the target's emotions, and ultimately their relationship to one of the following things. And you can do more than one of these, but if you're trying to craft an advanced social compromise, you have to manipulate the emotions to take advantage of and ultimately develop something that goes into one of these three areas. You have to either expand or contract somebody's boundaries. What do we mean by that? We mean basically what would they normally do or not do? What is their kind of comfort level? And what we're trying to get them to do is expand that, to take a small step outside of that comfort area. And once we have them outside that comfort area, is continue to help them move outside that. And we can do the opposite. We can take somebody who may have a wide set of boundaries and restrict those. And I won't get into the reason why, but that's a much more powerful approach, is to take somebody who has wide boundaries and reduce the boundary. And it has to do with trust, trusted relationships. The second thing is to figure out how we can use emotion to either to impact normalcy. And so, what is the day-to-day to somebody? Can we do something that ultimately their emotions do not become different based on a new normal? And so we can adjust that emotional response over time. And so that's an important thing to do, right? At some point, things become complacent because they become normal to us. So if we can adjust your emotions, your reaction to something we do, based on what you think is normal or not normal, then we're probably going to be able to compromise what you do. And then lastly, and one of the most powerful ones, is what's called a pain-pleasure or pleasure-pain equation. And this is that we know that humans typically, and this is the simplest one to do, by the way, and the fastest, it's immediate results in most cases, is people will tend to move away from pain and towards pleasure, right? So if we can do something to help them avoid pain and achieve pleasure in our interaction with them, then they're going to be more open to trusting us. And we're going to then be able to obviously exploit that relationship. Now, all of this comes back to how that behavior will dictate. Now, the behavior we're looking for as attackers in this context is typically going to be something that helps us compromise the environment, right? So you could think about, they're going to download, click, enter something, they're going to share something. Something's going to be done that ultimately allows us to go past them and gain access to the environment. And again, since we're trying to be very surgical here, we're not just going to send out 1,000 emails. We're going to look for how can we do this and get a 90% success rate or higher, which is really, really effective, and a very good return on investment. So that's really what we're focused on. Anytime we're thinking advanced social compromise, we're trying to establish that relationship. We're going to manipulate emotions or utilize emotions to hopefully develop relationships that ultimately lead to behaviors that we can compromise. So that's kind of the secret sauce. But behind all that, there is kind of a, I guess, pseudoscience, if you will. The one thing I use a lot is something called NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. So if I am asked to go and do an advanced social compromise, whether that's in person or through a kind of phishing or vishing or other attack, I will use NLP. And this has a lot of power in it, because it helps to kind of codify how we go about doing this compromise. Now, I'm not going to go deep into NLP. If you don't know what it is, you know, it's a great kind of thing to read about and learn about. It doesn't take very long to figure out what it is, but I can tell you that it works, and I'll show you some ways that this can be used. And it's pretty powerful and effective face to face to someone. So the idea here behind NLP is that you have five senses, and you take in about 2 million bits of information on a per second per minute basis. So you're taking in a ton of information. Even right now when we're speaking, you may be surfing the web, you may be listening, looking outside, you may be thinking about what you're going to do for dinner, you may be imagining what you did last night. Whatever it is, you have about 2 million bits of information that are coming into all five senses. And the human brain can't process all of that. So there's a few things it does. It applies filters. And those filters either generalize the information to make it more manageable, right? It distorts the information and tries to make it look like something that you're familiar with, because otherwise you have to stop and process that, or it deletes information. So before we go forward, let's talk a little bit about how that impacts social compromise. Let's use a phishing email. Why are, you know, cyber squatting so effective, right? Where we take a domain and we make it look very similar to a word that we're common with. So if I wanted to go to wellington.com, wellington.com, and I replace that with we11ing.ington.com, you know, it's not Wellington, right? It's we11ington.com. But why does the human kind of fall for that, right? Well, part of it is what we're hearing here is distortion and deletion or generalization. I either generalize that, yep, that looks fine. I have too much more information coming into me, including things like temperature and light and sensitivity and pollen counts, and all of that's being processed by our brain at the same time. So this is comfortable. It looks the same. I'm going to do it. You may also distort or delete the information or replace it, right? So this is kind of how that phishing attack actually works when it's well crafted, is we're basically using these filters to our advantage. So if you want to get past somebody's defenses, the best thing you can do is help them generalize either what you're saying or writing. You can help them have them distort what you're saying or delete pieces of information so they're comfortable with it. Now remember, all of this is being done by the person. You don't have to do anything really purposely in terms of deleting the truth, or you can just make things kind of sort of relevant and they'll interpret it, right? And we do this a lot. And then once we have that, we chunk the information. So we take these 2 million bits and we try to chunk it down to 5 to 9 different things. And that ends up giving us a representative sample or model. The next thing is that representative sample dictates our state. And so our state is kind of our emotional response that we spoke about on the last slide. And then that takes us to a physiological response. Our heart starts racing, our pupils dilate or constrict, you know, our breathing changes, whatever it may be, right? There could be a hormone response, whatever it is going to ultimately drive a behavior. So when we think about somebody clicking on a link, downloading or not downloading, going to a website and entering their credentials and not thinking twice about it, when we talk about, you know, people falling for silly phishing attempts, you know, things are misspelled in the email, the grammar was off, it came from Nigeria, you know, it's a long also from Pakistan, you know, whatever it may be, it's because this has occurred, right? We've generalized, distorted, or deleted in an attempt to chunk the information into a really busy day so that we can get some type of representative model, impacts our mental state, causes a physiological response, and we click the link. And so that's simply what's happening. Now, if I can take that to a much more scientific level, by scientific, I don't mean psychologically scientific, maybe a better way to think about it is if I can get that to a more sophisticated level and apply these approaches in a more surgical fashion, then that is what's going to drive a better return. Now, the problem for you as a defender is that attackers who employ this don't really need to care about misspelling, embedding viruses, and doing all those quacky things that ultimately trip your alerts. So what you need to be thinking about as a defender against somebody who's employing advanced social compromise is, how are you going to deal with this? Right? Like, what are you going to do to overcome this psychological response? Because that's basically it. And sadly, what we're saying is this, the human, the brain, is your best line of defense. And most of the attacks that we see that are successful is because the human failed or the human didn't identify the attack, which is a whole nother thing about alert pollution. So bottom line in, you have to take time to really get humans to understand that they're going to mess up, typically when they speed up or they don't take time to properly filter the inbound information. And this doesn't just apply to, cybersecurity. We can see this occur when we have medication errors, when we have never events occur in hospitals. All of those things, any patient safety issue, patient quality of care, all of these things come back to basically this pattern and this algorithm, right? At a high level, there's a lot going on under covers, but everybody that's trying to improve patient safety, reduce never events, reduce medication errors is battling with the same thing. And cybersecurity is just the newest piece of that puzzle of how do we get our end users and our clinicians and everybody else involved for example, a hospital setting to slow down and think twice about what they're doing. So in this program, we're thinking about how do we employ this. So I'll give you a little thing you can do at home. This is quite simple. This is called mirroring. And this is a way to reduce somebody's defense, right? And you can do this especially well when you just meet somebody. It doesn't work as well or as obviously if you know the person. Because you've already probably mirrored their behavior and you're comfortable with them. But what mirroring is just a method to get comfort and familiarity with a target. So I used to be an undercover police officer, an undercover narcotics officer. So how would I get somebody to take comfort in selling me drugs, right? Well, mirroring was one way to do that. In fact, one of the most powerful ways, right, is over time they get comfortable with me. So to perform mirroring, you just have to be patient. Doesn't need to be hours. It could be something that you do over a few minutes. But you need to, as the attacker, focus on subtle assimilation. So the way mirroring works is if you put your left hand, if you talk with an accent, then I'm going to talk with an accent. If you tilt your head to the right, I'm going to tilt my head to the left, so they mirror each other. If you scratch the back of your head, I may scratch my nose. These are subtle little things. Now, if I do every one of those things as you're doing them, if I just go suddenly from talking without an accent to the accent you're using, it's too obvious. So I'm helping you guys kind of learn how to do this so that you can go lower people's compromises and take advantage of them. So you have to trust me on this, that you just got to slow it down a little bit and not do every action they do. So maybe if you scratch your neck, I won't scratch mine. If you tilt your head, I'm going to tilt my head. If you then, maybe look up, I'm not going to look up. So I'm going to maybe mirror every third or fourth thing that you do. If I'm going to mirror your accent or your speech pattern or your pace of speaking or the words that you use, which obviously are the most powerful things to do, if you really want to mirror somebody, start using their language and their speech pattern. I'm going to be very careful that I don't just introduce an accent immediately, right? I may subtly hint at the accent. I may suddenly start using little words that you use. So the idea here is to slowly reduce your discomfort and reduce your guard. And this is the same exact thing we can do with email, phone calls, and other types of social compromise, right? I can use email or things of that nature to introduce technical language little by little. I can introduce things about your life if I know you on social media. So it's all the same thing. We're just mirroring your behavior to reduce your level of trust, right? To include me in your inner circle kind of thing. So it's something you can try. It's real simple to do. Typically works best when you're doing it with people that you don't know. So that's one technique. This comes from the world of NLP, and it helps us bypass and control those filters and get the appropriate behavior we're looking for. This next thing is kind of a test, and I'm going to try to do this with you guys. I've never done this virtually. We'll see if it works, if it doesn't work. But I use this when I train law enforcement and special operations teams, right? One of the things I work with is tactical units, and one of the things I'm trying to get them to do when I work with them is maintain situational awareness, right? And make sure that they don't become either tunnel visioned or that they don't let their psychology get the best of them. So I'm going to try this with you guys. I don't know if it'll work. It takes about a minute, minute and a half. And if it does work, that'd be cool. You could put it into the chat room. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So to do that, I need to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to switch screens, and then hopefully this will work. So let's see if this does or doesn't. Okay. Uh, Hold on one second. Okay, let me see if I can do this. Do you guys just see a purple screen? Laura, can you tell me, or
Yes,
just a purple screen?
just the purple.
No. All right, that's not working. All right, I apologize for that. We will not be able to do that. Let me just try it one more time.
This is a test of selective.
One second. Sorry. You still see a purple screen?
It was just the bluish purple screen, yes.
All right. Okay. Sorry, I'm not gonna be able to do that. So, well, yeah, let me just try one more thing and see if this will work.
Attention.
Sorry, guys. Just a purple screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. So I'll explain what it is. It's actually, some of you may have done this. It's actually pretty cool. But let's start here. So I'll explain what it is. So what happens, this is a famous experiment that was done a couple decades ago. And what it is you have a set of basketball players, some dressed in all white, some dressed in all black. And the people on the black team can only pass to other people dressed in, pass a basketball to other people dressed in black, and people in the white uniforms can only pass to people dressed in white uniforms their basketball. So they just kind of are passing back and forth the basketballs between themselves. And your job is to count how many times the basketball is passed between the players. And so the issue here is that when you're counting how many times the people dressed in white pass the ball back and forth, in some point in time, a person in a gorilla suit walks out and does a little bit of a dance and then walks off screen. Now, what I will tell you is, believe it or not, and people that don't go through this experiment don't believe it, and I've had Navy SEALs do this, Delta Force, special weapons teams, and they all kind of are cocky about it, and they don't believe it's going to happen to them. The average is, I think, 96 or 97% of everybody who goes through this experiment does not see the gorilla. And in fact, and the gorilla is not hidden. It walks in front of all the players and does this dance. Now, the reason I bring this up here is that we're trying to, as advanced social compromise, play on that. We're trying to really focus on how do we get people to give us their attention and ignore the gorilla, right? Which could be a bunch of different things within that social compromise. So that's why we use that. It's also a great tool to use with your users, right? To show them that video and get them to understand that when you start losing attention, the little things pass by, in this case, a pretty big thing, which is a gorilla. So it's pretty eye-opening. So it's a great way to do security awareness training from a defender perspective. Okay, so back to our NLP thing. So one of the things we have to figure out here is how do we establish a relationship or exploit a relationship and overcome trust? So we're going to use a couple of things, right? And these things here at the top are the things that you probably teach your users. Look for emails with poor grammar. So we as the attackers are going to use Grammarly and make sure that our emails have really good grammar and spelling. We could use some urgency and alarm, right? Why? Because urgency and alarm creates emotion. Emotion helps create a physiological state that then drives a reaction. Enticement, and an urgency alarm doesn't have to be like a crazy alarm. It could be like, hey, I need to know by 3 o'clock this afternoon, right? Something of that nature. That's considered urgency alarm. Enticement, right, is, pain and pleasure, right? We talked about the pain and pleasure principle. And so here we're trying, enticements are usually pleasure oriented or pain avoidance. Authority figures, again, this is pain and pleasure, because again, we're trying to, maybe it's an email coming from an authority figure, your boss, whoever it may be, a parent, depends on what it is. And then a trusted figure. This could be a friend, social media acquaintance, professional acquaintance, just depends on what it is. But these are typically the knobs we're going to pull depending on what we're trying to do. We may use all of them. And it doesn't matter if we're using email or we're using voice or in person. Typically, we're going to do something like this. Obviously, if we're using phone or in person, grammar and spelling doesn't matter because there's no screen on the top of my head that's typing out what I'm thinking or saying. So these are our little levers to pull. So we're going to, in this situation, find a way, or we're going to assume that we can't get directly to you, the target. We need to get to a partner. So these little black marbles are partners of your organization, and the red marbles are you, the target that we want to go after. So what we're going to do is compromise that partner, right? This black marble here. And the reason we want to do that is because you already have a relationship. So I don't have to do all the work to get that relationship in place. And I'm going to let this build out, but I'm going to show you kind of the attack mechanics that we're hoping to do here. And this attack does not require any fancy malware, viruses, or anything else. All it does is, this is an example of advanced social compromise where we're utilizing an established relationship to improve, to reduce the level of trust that we have to overcome, and ultimately exploit the relationship to achieve our objective on target. So I'm going to send you an email. It doesn't really matter what the email has in it, whether there's a link or not, but we're going to actually, in this email, embed a Word document. Okay, and it doesn't matter what's in the Word document. It could be a blank piece of Word. It doesn't matter. The other thing is, because people sometimes when I do this, they're like, well, our anti-phishing stuff would catch this. No, you wouldn't. Then they'd tell me, well, the antivirus would catch this. No, you wouldn't. Why? Because there is absolutely nothing in the document. There is no macro, there is no malware, there is no virus, there's no Trojan, there's no 0-day. It is literally just a Word document. It has nothing in it that is malicious. If you alert on this document, you will alert on every Word document sent in your organization, because it is no different. I could take a document you send me and send it back to you, and it is the same thing. This attack will work. So how does this attack work? Okay, first of all, it's coming from a trusted source, your third-party partner vendor who you have a communication with. So we've overcome the trust barrier. We're exploiting an established relationship rather than having to create one ourselves. And we've established a Word document. And what I'm going to do based on my information gathering is have a subject line that would be relevant from the partner you're getting this email from. So if you had, let's say, a payroll partner, and I send this to somebody in finance who worked with that payroll partner, I may have a subject line that says, here are the, payroll period 6 figures, or something that would be relevant. And why would it be relevant? Because I've done information gathering and I know the types of emails you're getting from that partner. So there's a Word document that's attached. And this actually can work with Excel or PowerPoint, but we're going to use Word. That Word document, when you open it, is going to do nothing except one thing. When you open that Word document, Word itself is looking for a DOT file. It's a template file. Typically, it's going to look for normal.dot. But in this document, we're going to say that normal.dot lives on some server with some address. Now, the only chance you have is if you somehow are blocking this IP address. But if it's a if the IP address is not part of an IOC, you're not going to block it until afterwards, when people figure out like, oh, that's not a good IP address to go to. But in the early hours of the morning, early hours of the stage of the attack, you're not going to block that IP. You just have to realize that. So what happens is when somebody opens that document, and that document is told, you get your DOT file from this server over here, which happens to be my server, the attacker, or your server if you guys are attackers as well. What happens is you're going to send me your user ID and your password hash. okay? And when you send that to me, I'm just going to store it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else. Why? Because then I can start running hash cracking. And this is going to come down to your password complexity, or if you have MFA or passwordless authentication. If you have really strong passwords, 12 characters or more, MFA, or passwordless authentication employed in your environment, you'd probably be safe from this. If you don't, you got 8-character passwords or something like that, less than 12, then this is going to work, and eventually I'm going to get this user's ID and password hash cracked, and I'm going to be able to log in as that user. So this is an example of using advanced social compromise and using technology as it was intended to be used in getting the user credentials, right? So just something to think about. What I'm trying to do is bring together all the little different pieces of the puzzle, because sometimes I think we're always thinking, oh, I got to do, I got to do antivirus or whatever. Yes, you do. You have to do all those things, but you need to understand that there are other ways that things can be compromised. And so sometimes when you're scratching your head and wondering why didn't antivirus catch that, it's maybe because of stuff like this, because this works with a variety of different things. I can do this with desktop shortcuts, link files, anything that requires a user ID and password to open or access or establish a file. If I can do that and send it remote without any malicious code in the way, it's pretty effective. Okay, so we got that from an email. Let's talk about performing voice attacks, right? I want to go after somebody via voice. Now, in order to do this, we want the objective here is to get the person to do one of two things: give us the user get the user to provide their user ID and password to us over the phone, or get the user to go to a website and enter the credentials or download software. Why do we do one of these two or both, right? These are fallbacks. The first one is just literally, hey, can I have your user ID and password? And the user's like, yes, here you go. Now, actually, it's not that easy. I'll explain how we get to that in a moment. But what if they say, no, I'm not, I can't do that. It's against corporate policy. Like, oh yeah, you're right. You know what? You're absolutely right. My bad. I shouldn't have asked that from you. Good job. Good job. It's just been a long day. Go to this website and you can authenticate there. Oh, okay. And they do, right? So that's why we have these two methods, because they may be smart enough and they're smarter than the average bear and they don't give us their user ID and password. So then we just send them to a website and say, that's a secure website. And obviously that website is going to have the logos and look like your organization's website or intranet portal. So it'll look familiar and they'll be like, oh, okay, this makes sense to me. So how does this work? How do you have the highest possible success rate when you're trying to attack someone through voice or vishing or whatever? First of all, not trying to be sexist, use a female operative. Female operatives have a much higher success rate. I'll explain why in a moment once we get through this. Point number 2, your operative must pose as a single mom. Again, I'll explain why in a moment, but you cannot have, if you want the highest level success, do not use any other type of operative, right, or script. Third, the operative has to understand your organizational structure. They need to know some people in your organization of importance. And fourth, you have to have a very strong backstory that is playing and using the NLP stuff I just talked about, right? Either mirroring or we're using one of the other techniques, something to get people to lower their guard. So how does this work? Well, first of all, let me tell you our Sensato's success rate with this. 86% of the time that we are employed to come in and do voice attacks on people, we will get user ID and passwords from people in one of these two methods, okay? You may not believe that, but there's a reason for that, and it's this stuff over here. Why does that work? The reason we use a female operative, and it's not just us, anybody who's doing advanced social compromise, this is what works, is because the female operative is psychologically neutral. If the person on the other side of the phone is a guy, it works. And if it's a female, it works. Why do we say single mom? And I'm sorry if this offends anybody or whatever in these times. This is just why it works. If it's a guy, 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh, single mom. Let me see if I can flirt. That's literally what happens here. If it's another woman, 9 out of 10 times, they're like, wow, you're a single mom. That's tough. And they're empathetic. So in either side of that equation, we have a pretty strong chance of getting people that are going to relate to our female operative. Now, what happens next is we have a backstory. We have urgency. I'm way behind on this, and Rick's on my neck about getting it, or Steve or Lisa, right? Who's Rick, Steve, or Lisa? They're somebody in your organization in a position of power. And here's something you can say to people, say, you know how they are. They don't get what they want when they want it. All hell breaks loose. And I'm just trying to hold on to this job. I'm just a consultant. And guess what? 9 out of 10 people, even if they don't know Rick, Lisa, or Steve, will say, yeah, I know, I've heard about them. Let me see, how can I help you? And then this dialogue creates from there into, well, I'm just trying to confirm if we've gotten some, we sent out some software, and I'm just trying to make sure it works, but you need to log out first. Did you log out? Can you log out? Yes. Can you log back in? Oh, yep, I'm logging back in. Oh, okay, were you able to log in? No, oh, yes, I was, right? Why is the person able to log in? Because they're using the user ID and password they should be using. But the next thing we say to them is, well, that shouldn't be, because the software actually requires you to reset your user ID and password. Can you do me a favor? What password are you using? Oh, here's my password. Oh, that's wrong. It doesn't make any sense. Let me call you right back. I got to figure out what's happening here. So what did we employ in that voice conversation, right? We employed urgency, right? We employed some incentive. We employed pleasure and pain, right? We expanded their boundaries. We did all the stuff that we talked about in a very short, fast amount of time. This doesn't require a lot of setup, some information gathering, and then we go off on it. And do some people not want to give their password? Yeah, it doesn't work 100%. About 86% of the time it does, which is kind of scary if you think about it. And this is usually, we're brought in usually after people are trained on not doing this. So it's not like these are people that don't have any idea on you shouldn't give out your user ID and password on the phone. What's really interesting is people don't report this, right? So they don't actually go out and report this information like, hey, somebody just called me and said I should give them my user ID and password. Who is this? Or hey, call Lisa and go, hey, do you have somebody named Avery working for you? And suddenly find out like, no, there's nobody named Avery working for me. What's going on? None of that ever happens. It's just like, okay, I'll call you back. Okay, thank you. So again, why? Because of this, right? Too much information. We try to chunk it down. We've got other things to do, and it leads to inappropriate behavior. I'm not going to be able to do this due to the fact that I can't share you screens, but this is one of the most intriguing and powerful uses of advanced social compromise concepts that I've ever seen in my life. I'll try at some point in the future to maybe see if we can share this, but given GoToMeeting, I have or GoToWebinar, which is the tech we're using, I can't show you this stuff. I can't switch screens and show you what I wanted to show you. So I apologize for that. So with that, we're just about an hour. So I was going to show you an actual compromise we went through and did where we compromised a family using social media. And we actually were able to infiltrate an office, get them to download a bunch of stuff, and then eventually take over their environment. And then establish an actual chat session with them using some custom software we deployed because they opened an image that they shouldn't have opened. And in the whole script of that script, we actually kidnapped some of the people that work for this organization. So the whole scenario here was kidnap this family, and you have a choice of what you want to do now. And we've also taken over all your computers. So that was kind of a very advanced social compromise, but unfortunately we don't have time to go through that. Just some real quick things before you guys head out. June 9th from 2 to 3, we are going to have a webinar that hopefully you will find really interesting, even if you're not in the market for anything. We're going to talk about our full cybersecurity as a service platform, our Nightingale software, our CTOC, our widgets. So please, if you can, even if you just want to humor us, sign up, attend. I'd say we were serving like chocolate milk and muffins, but we're all virtual, so that will not happen. But I will do my best to make it a great use of your time and hopefully open your eyes to kind of some of the things that are coming onto the scene in terms of next generation technologies and integrated cybersecurity platforms and how we're doing that with our CTOC and what the CTOC does and all of that. So if you could make it, really would appreciate that. So thank you for that in advance. Well, lessons learned, dark psychology is the manipulation of emotion, relationships, and behaviors. You guys are thinking, how do you defend against this stuff? You really need to think about security awareness training that focuses on getting your users to understand these concepts so they can slow down, process what they're doing, and not lower their trust. We've talked about NLP, really cool to look into, even if it's just for you doing party tricks on weekends and stuff like that to people. Exploiting trusted relationships is really ultimately what we're trying to do in one shape or another. Pleasure versus pain, we've talked about that. It's a very powerful motivator. And typically, if you're thinking about putting together your own phishing campaigns, this is a real simple one to employ so that you can determine if your users would fall for these things or not. So with that, don't know if there's any questions, but I do want to be respectful of people's time. Truly appreciate you putting up with me today. With that, Laura, anything come up or anything we should go over or think about?
A question did come in if the recording would be available, and yes, you will get an email after the session with the link to this recording as well as the first 2 sessions. So look for that. And then we'll see if we can also share the link to some of the videos that John talked about. And someone else shared in the questions box about single mom operative success. There's some other information out there about that. So we'll see if we can share some of that as well.
Great. Well, hopefully this was useful to you guys. I know it's probably a little different than most phishing discussions, but you guys get all the basic stuff and you know what to do. And all I'm trying to do is help you kind of take things to a new level. Hopefully I did that. I don't know if I always do. Love to hear your feedback. Again, if you have topics you want to discuss, you want to present, love to have other people present, or if there's things you hope we can cover, let us know. We'll do our best to try and do it justice. With that, hope you have the rest of your day is awesome, and look forward to our next time together. Please remember the CAS event. You can register to that at info@sensado.co or just reach out to me directly, john.gomez@sensado.co. Thank you, everybody.